afternoon, members of the jury. Money and control. Those are the two things that the defendant, Herbert Swilley, stood to lose as his marriage to Tim Smith fell apart and Tim planned to leave him. But instead of letting Tim go, the defendant savagely murdered him. He beat Tim in the face, then he placed a ligature around Tim's neck and squeezed it so tightly that the blood vessels in Tim's eyes burst and his neck broke. Tim Smith was 59 years old when he was brutally murdered. Tim was loved by everyone who knew him. He was warm, welcoming, and made people feel better about life. One of Tim's passions was making sure there was good assisted living facilities for seniors. Tim was the executive director of Brookdale Senior Living, which was an assisted living facility here in Ocala for senior citizens. His position, executive director, was a high-level position with a salary well over $100,000 a year, plus bonuses. Tim had been the director there about 7 years before he was murdered. Now, the assisted senior living healthcare industry was relatively small in the state of Florida, and Tim was well regarded and well known in that industry. Tim had a great life. He had a good job, he had a nice home, and a diverse group of friends that adored him. But there was one glaring problem: his relationship with the defendant, his husband, Herbert Swilley. Herbert and Tim have been together for about 15 years and married for 8 of those years. But before they began their romantic relationship, the defendant was married to a woman named Angela for many years. The defendant and Angela had one child together, a daughter named Jordan, who was born in 2003. Now, Tim and the defendant had been friends for about 4 years before their relationship turned romantic, and the defendant left his wife and moved in with Tim. And Jordan was about 8 years old when this happened. Now, Tim and the defendant lived in several different places before they settled on a home in southeast Ocala. Now, the home was on a nice-sized piece of property. It was 4 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms. It had 2 separate living rooms. It had a garage outside and a big shed outside as well. And on that property, they had 2 cameras. A Ring doorbell camera that was on the front door, and then a camera that was high up on a pole that faced their shed and their garage. Now, in the beginning of Tim and the defendant's relationship, Jordan lived with her mother. But when Jordan became a freshman in high school, she decided to move in with Tim and the defendant. Tim and Jordan were very close, and they had a special relationship. Jordan considered Tim a second father. Now, in addition to their main home that I just told you about, Tim and the defendant rented a small 2-bedroom apartment that was about 2 miles away from their main home where they lived. Tim and the defendant had an open relationship. They had sex with other men together, and they had sex with other men separately. And they would meet these other men on dating apps, mainly Grindr and Adam for Adam. Now, they also liked to role play and do fantasy things in their sexual relationship. So in this apartment, they put things like a sex swing, a massage table, and they had a toolbox that had different kinds of sexual paraphernalia in the room. This was something that they thought was fun and they both enjoyed. And the reason they got the apartment is because Jordan was living at home with them, and they wanted to keep this away from her. Now, Tim was the breadwinner of the family. While he had a high-paying job as the executive director of Brookdale, the defendant, in contrast, was a handyman. The defendant and Tim liked to do things. They liked to travel, They like to buy things like motorcycles. And they spend Tim's money as fast as he made it. And the defendant could not afford to live this lifestyle without Tim's salary. Now, the defendant was painfully aware of this fact. And over time, he grew bitter. And he came to resent Tim for this. Now, the relationship between Tim and the defendant had been declining for years, and had just gotten worse in the month leading up to Tim's murder. The beginning of the end was when they both stopped drinking. Tim and the defendant had been heavy drinkers for most of their relationship. But somewhere around 2019, Tim joined Alcoholics Anonymous. The defendant followed Tim's lead and joined several months later. Tim embraced the AA lifestyle. His chapter's name was Happy, Joyous, and Free. He led many meetings, he sponsored countless people, and he went to meetings up to 5 times a week. Now, through AA, Tim cultivated a very close group of friends. And these friends would go out to dinner after meetings, and they would occasionally go to brunch on Sunday. Now, once the drinking stopped, the problem is the arguing started. They started arguing all the time. It had gotten so bad at home that Jordan would leave home early and go to work at Burrito's Italian restaurant just to get away from the argument at the house between Tim and the defendant. Now, Tim knew the marriage was over, and he was going to leave, and he knew it couldn't be fixed. And in early March, a professional recruiter reached out to Tim and said, hey, there's this job for an executive director at an assisted living facility for seniors in DeLand, and we're interested in you. Tim thought, this is my chance. I can leave the defendant, get a new job, and get away. Tim sent his resume to the recruiter, and he did an hour-long video interview that was recorded over Zoom. This interview was sent to the regional director for this assisted living facility in DeLand named Nina Corsi. And she looked at it, and she was very interested in Tim. And he was very close to getting this new job. The defendant knew all about it, was not happy. He knew if Tim left and took this new job, he wouldn't be able to stay in the house they lived in. He wouldn't be able to have the lifestyle that he had become accustomed to. And he started telling other friends about it, how he wasn't happy, and Tim was going to try to take this job. And he became very angry. 5 days before Tim was murdered, the defendant told a friend named Daryl Levine, if Tim thinks he's leaving me and taking a new job in DeLand, he's got another thing coming. He also told that same friend, Jordan and I loved Tim. And this really bothered Daryl, his friend. And it stuck out in his head because it was in the past tense. So things got worse, time went by, and the defendant had to face some cold, hard facts. It's the end of March now. He knows Tim's leaving him. Tim's moving to another city to get a new job, and he can't support himself without Tim. He's mad. He feels cheated. He thinks Tim owes him, and he's not going to let Tim leave him like that. So to the defendant, there was only one option. Tim had to die. Because that would solve all his problems. Because Tim had a life insurance policy worth $333,000. Tim also had a 401 retirement plan with $48,000 in it. And guess who was the beneficiary of both of those things? The defendant, Herbert Swilley. $381,000 surely would go a long way for the defendant once Tim was dead. So the defendant decided, I'm going to kill him, I'm going to murder Tim, and he picked the date. March 23rd, Thursday of 2023. And this day, at this time, Tim was closer than he'd ever been to getting that offer for that new job. Because Friday morning was one of his final interviews, which was going to be with Nina Corsi, the executive director of the facility of the new job. So Thursday was the day. And the defendant put his plans in motion. Now the defendant and the victim were both physically fit people. And the defendant knew he would need some help taking Tim down. What was the easiest and quietest way to do that? It would be to drug Tim. That way Tim couldn't fight back. That was part of his plan that day. So that Thursday, that morning, everybody goes to work. Jordan, the defendant, and Tim. They come home that evening. They all have dinner together. They end up watching a movie, the three of them. Around 9:30, the defendant and Tim go to bed, and Jordan goes in her room. Sometime that evening of the 23rd, the defendant secretly overdoses Tim with diphenhydramine. Diphenhydramine is in medicines like Tylenol PM and Benadryl. Diphenhydramine is the ingredient that makes you tired in those medicines. Now, a normal dose of diphenhydramine, if you tested somebody's blood, would be 55 nanograms per milliliter. When they tested Tim's blood after he died, his level of diphenhydramine was 2,000 nanograms per milliliter. Tim was probably not even awake when the attack began, but he certainly couldn't fight back. The defendant beat him. He had a black eye. Tim had bruising on his face. He had cuts and swelling. And then the defendant put that ligature over Tim's neck. And he squeezed it so tight and for so long that he broke Tim's neck. And you will hear that the type of injury is called a hyperextension type of injury, which means Tim's neck was bent backwards this way until it broke. Now the next part of the defendant's plan, he already had it ready. I'm going to say that Tim left in the middle of the night to meet somebody for sex at the apartment, and that person's who killed him. So he had to start getting that plan ready. So after he killed Tim, the defendant put Tim's body in his own white truck. You'll see pictures of this white truck. It's distinctive because the whole truck is white, except for the tailgate, which is black. Now the defendant knew also, hey, I got to take Tim's phone as well with me to the apartment, because Tim's not going to go meet somebody to have sex without his phone. So he takes Tim's phone as well. And then he says, okay, also Tim always takes this small black bag that he has with him when he goes to the apartment. In the bag are Tim's wallet, his keys, and a few other things. So the defendant gets that bag also. He puts the bag, Tim's phone, and Tim's body in his white truck, and he drives over to the apartment. And from there, he stages the murder. He puts out 2 bowls and a bag of chips, so it looks like Tim had somebody over. He takes off Tim's pants, leaves him on the floor in the bedroom, half naked. He takes bleach and sprays Tim's body and all around Tim, and takes some towels to make it look like somebody tried to erase the DNA. Then he leaves Tim there with the bag and the phone. He gets in his truck and he goes back home. But now he has to get Tim's Jeep over to the apartment, because obviously Tim had to get there somehow. So he leaves his white truck at their house. He gets in Tim's Jeep. Tim has a white Jeep. And he drives Tim's vehicle to the apartment. He leaves Tim's vehicle at the apartment, goes inside, and puts the key to Tim's Jeep in that black bag where Tim would have put it. But how's he going to get home if he leaves Tim's Jeep there? Easy. He's physically fit. It's a 2-mile walk in the middle of the night in March. He walks back home. And when he gets home, it's around 3:26. First thing he does, access the Ring doorbell application on his phone. He's got to get rid of all that footage. It's going to show him moving everything around, moving Tim's body and setting everything up. So he deletes that. Now we're well into Friday morning, the 24th, by the time he does all this. So he normally gets up and goes to the gym at 4:40. So he's going to go along like a regular day, like nothing happened. He gets up, leaves for the gym at 4:40, gets to the gym at 5. Stays to the gym till 6 o'clock, and goes home. Takes a shower and changes, then leaves again. And he goes to Lowe's. And then, oddly, his next stop is the dump. At 7 in the morning, right when they open, he's there with his truck and his trailer. After he goes to the dump, he goes back home. And now he goes home because the dog groomer is supposed to be coming. And he wants to make sure that Jordan's awake to let the dog groomer in. But ultimately, Jordan will end up to be one of the many mistakes that the defendant made. Because remember, Jordan was home when he killed Tim. And even though Tim was drugged, surely there was some noise. So when Jordan woke up that morning, she asked him, "Where's Tim?" He said he didn't know. And he asked Jordan, "Did you hear anything last night?" And Jordan said, "I thought I heard a door or something." And he said, "You didn't hear anything. That's all you need to remember." Jordan started to ask some more questions, but he quickly shut it down and said, "If anybody asks, I was home all night." Jordan was upset, confused, and thought all of this behavior was very suspicious. But the defendant again went on with his day as planned. He left, he went down to the villages, and he did some of his handyman work that he was doing in the